Greetings and welcome to Retention Chronicles, the podcast with learnings from expert e-commerce brands and partners. I'm your host, Mariah Parsons. If you're here, you're either on a quest for e-commerce enlightenment or you accidentally clicked the wrong link. Either way, I am thrilled you stumbled into our corner of the internet, and I hope you'll stick around. We've got pearls of wisdom for everyone, whether you're running a multi-million-dollar business or simply just starting out on your entrepreneurial journey. Get ready for insights, chuckles, and perhaps a profound realization or two with this newest episode of Retention Chronicles. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Retention Chronicles. Ted, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited for it. I know it's early in the morning for us as well, so I'm bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to dive into this conversation. But I will introduce you first. So we today have Ted Galperin. He is partner and head of retail at Mythology. And I am so excited to have you on today because we met at Rice, which is in Chicago. We've had a couple of guests on from just like different interactions I had at the conference, and it was a great one. There's going to be a lot of crossover between your retail experience and my e-commerce one, and I think a lot of brands who are listening are going to find that they find themselves in the omni-channel experience, and they're going to be able to, plug and play and take bits and pieces and relate it to their brand. So I'm very excited for it today. And before we get started, Ted, I'm going to have you say hello and give a quick intro background on yourself.
Yeah, great. Hi, I'm Ted Galperin. I'm, as Mariah said, partner and head of retail at Mythology. Um, I've been a designer by trade for the past 20 years, and really specialize in conceptual retail customer experiences. So that's sort of the focus of my work, and something I'm really excited about.
Love it. Okay, beautiful. So a little bit more background for our listeners on the presentation that you gave at Rice, which is the Retail Innovation Conference and Expo, for those who aren't familiar. You were presenting with American Girl doll, and you were talking about how you all built out one of their new storefronts. And so I was sitting in that seat, extremely nostalgic, because as I just shared with you, I grew up in New Jersey. So it was an annual trip that my mother and my sister and my brother, if my if my mom was dragging him along that day, if we would go into the American Girl doll store and have, like a birthday celebration. Usually it was one of the best days. Just like going into the city, feeling so adult, right? Like that was really what the I would say, like, one of the biggest takeaways is you go into this like adult looking world where you're like having tea and you're like, quote unquote, taking care of your doll, right? You're like assuming a caretaker role, but you're still a little girl or little boy playing with dolls. So very nostalgic for me when you were presenting and talking about just like how you are crafting that experience for a consumer to have. And I'm very excited to dive into that. If you could share a little bit of the overview, I think that would be great, just to give kind of our listeners the same, I guess, one-on-one experience that I was getting in that room. Because just the way you all were thinking about building out the retail experience and all the dolls of like doll world, and then like the real life world were just fascinating, of like the staircase and the railing and like just all of the play, all of the ways that you play into like the space in between. It was great.
Oh, thank you very much, Mariah. That's so nice to hear. I'm glad it resonated.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I would say, a little background on the project. It's a American Girl store in Dallas, in Park Lane, which is a shopping complex there. They had moved from a different location to a smaller footprint, but they wanted to pack in as much excitement and sort of imagination that they had in the bigger space into the smaller space. So we were sort of challenged to figure out how to do that in about 5,000 square feet. And what we really tried to do was think about this, the brand itself started about 30 years ago and was built around this idea of giving girls the ability to imagine themselves outside their own world. And there really wasn't that many things for girls like that, especially at that time. So, we really just as a brand value that just felt incredibly important and something we really wanted to dive into. And then at the same time, they were saying to us, it's owned by Mattel. How do we make it relevant for a new audience? The original brand was really built around paperback books and lots of words and storytelling. And, the world has just changed. So how do we kind of get those same feelings that you had growing up, but do it and tell those same stories for a modern audience? And so quickly we came around to this idea of what you were saying, where it's sort of this adult world for kids, and really making a space that felt like kids had permission to enter and it was their space. It wasn't an adult world they were living in, it was for them. But with that, it's not some crazy explosion playground, with ball pits and things like that, not that kind of kids place. It's this sort of refined place where you're saying to little girls and boys, like, you get to live out your fantasy of what it's like to be a grown up, and to bring your doll along with that. And what we also loved was that this is the only place where, if we're imagining ourselves as the point of view of the doll, it's the only place where they can get their hair done. It's the only place where they have accessible seating at a cafe and they can have tea, and everything is their size. So how can we put ourselves not only in the little girl's shoes, but in the doll's shoes as well? And so we thought about this shift of perspective from doll to girl to mom, and then repeating the process, because a lot of the moms bringing their daughters in today were the millennials who grew up with the brand. And so there's a really nice kind of harmony and sisterhood to that we wanted to celebrate. So we had to sort of, without any visuals, we had an interesting kind of condition with our space that had kind of this platform surrounded by two atriums. And it was really at the heart of the space. And so what we did was we put in that space, on the first floor and the second floor, this two-story dollhouse, but that is life size. So instead of the typical American Girl world says, take something life size and shrink it to doll, what we were doing is taking something from the doll world and blowing it up to the human scale. And that really was the sort of center point of the experience. And we also wanted it, in both of those spaces is the premium services that you get only at American Girl. So for instance, the salon. So we also wanted it from a sales perspective and a customer engagement perspective for it to feel a little bit like a VIP area, a place where you're dying to get your doll's hair done, not just because you want it done, but because you want access to that space. You want to spend time in that space. You want to have that feeling that is beyond just the store shopping experience. So we did that. And then that also, I mentioned the two atrium spaces. On the left side is the cafe on the first floor. So it has this it sort of presides over this beautiful cafe space, and really becomes the anchor point from all the different places in the space. Additionally, we did details like at the front facade. Not only did we have our actual doors, but we actually built a door that was girl sized. And so there's this, smaller door to the right of our entry door that is specifically designed for a little girl to go through. And the girls, when they come there, their face lights up. They have to use the door. It becomes this real, like a rite of passage, that feeling of you've made it. And one of my favorite parts after, we went through about a year and change designing this space. But when I first got to go there and see, real customers there, the look on these girls' faces when they came in and they went through the door and they saw the dollhouse, was that sort of payoff that we really had designed for. Um, and yeah, so I would say that was sort of our big idea, this idea of scale and shifting scale, because that's the magic of dolls in a lot of ways. It's all the things that you know and love, shifted down to a doll size. And so how could we kind of play with that and make this space this, true one of a kind place?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I feel like people will hopefully they'll be able to look it up, right? But like the visual component of just like imagining what that could look like is so cool. So I urge all the listeners to go and actually look it up because just like even down to I remember like the patterns that you're choosing for the chairs and like all of that is like it is intentionally selected to like bring out emotion or to make sense in this XYZ way. Um, and it's so interesting because, and I want to see if you are noticing the same thing in the market of just like nostalgia is so at play right now. Like it's so trendy, it's so in. And I don't know if this is just something that is it like maybe comes and goes in waves, right? Like we always say, like fashion, like it'll be back at some point, right? And so, like Y2K, look at that right now, right? It's resurfacing. So I don't know if there's like some component of that right now, but I am just seeing like from a lot of different areas, even in marketing, right? From like Sabrina Carpenter and her like promotional videos right now, which Sabrina Carpenter is a musician for anyone who doesn't know. So like the music industry of she like released an old like promo commercial, right, for her new album. And then there's like I'm seeing nostalgia in just like e-commerce so much. And then just like Taylor Swift, the Eras tour, like again, music, like playing on this like girlhood, femininity, bringing it into like the adult life. I think there's a lot of different reasons that we find ourselves wanting to be nostalgic right now. But just while I was listening to you talk about your project with American Girl doll, I was just like, this is so prevalent right now in just like so many different areas of the universe that at least I exist in. And yeah, I was just curious, like in this conversation, I wanted to find out, are you seeing like the same, I guess, like push for nostalgia? Is it something that you would say is new? Or is it something that, you're always kind of finding a way to weave that into the retail experiences that you all are building out with brands?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I'll start with the like cultural part of it. For me, I think it's something that goes in waves.
Mm-hmm.
I think it relates, in my, unexpert opinion, I think it relates to people's feelings about the future.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, so I think, we're coming out of the pandemic and we're sort of, and politics is up in the air. And I think people don't know what the future really holds. And so they kind of try to hold on to the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of that stuff. I think for me, there's brands that do it really well. Like I think Vacation sun tanning oil, like all
Mm.
of their branding is really, really, nostalgic, but it's done with real expertise and sharpness. Um, but I think as far as our work, I think American Girl is a specific case where it had this 30-year heritage, one, and then it's also a brand that's built on these historical characters, which are nostalgic for, a time, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And so I think there needed to be a way that we brought in history. I think there's both history and nostalgia, but do it in a specific way. So, for instance, you mentioned the chairs earlier. They're all based on the girls, the historic girls' clothes, their dresses. So, a super fan is going to pick up on that, and someone who's not is just going to. It feels of this world. We also did the staircase you mentioned earlier. We did this kind of family album that ran down this big, big staircase. And that they had 30 years of illustrations from books and catalogs and all that stuff that we were able to incorporate into that world. So I think you have to, if you're going to use something that I think there's nostalgia, which is sort of sometimes like a pastiche of the past, and like your Sabrina Carpenter reference. It's like it really is referential, and that's the point. I think there's one bucket, and I think the other bucket is how can you take references like that, but rather than just copying them directly, you build and create something new with them.
Mm.
And I think that is the harder challenge for a designer or for a creative, but I think is ultimately what's going to keep culture moving forward. And so I think that's a lot of what I try to do is to take something, take something popular or sort of standard and make it feel special, or just always juxtaposing two ideas to make it feel new. And it's not always the easiest, but I think um helps to keep things modern and not feel like the past. Like I think of, after the 2008 recession, you saw a lot of like antlers on the walls and mustaches and people wearing flannel and and workwear, and this sort of return to a more like a less sort of tech global feeling, and more of this sort of like what my grandfather wore, and real hard work and all that sort of stuff. So but then I'll eventually that gets dated, and it looks, and when you're copying something that's already old, it looks even worse the
Yeah.
picture. So you have to be careful to sort of not get stuck there, because then it just it truly will feel dated, and not nostalgic
Yes.
anymore. So
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. No, I love that example. And I think it's a great one of, I love that you like categorize like referential nostalgia of just someone who is like, this is going to be funny, right? Or it's going to be for the bit, maybe not as long lasting. Like it's just more like, I think about it with marketing like campaigns versus your branding, where it's like, this is a campaign that maybe feels nostalgic, but we'll see if we keep it, right? Versus
Right.
like the branding of, vacation, or even like I think of Olipop, where it's like, they're trying to, make you think of like grabbing a soda at the diner with family and friends or whatever when you were younger, right? Like, um, so I love that difference. And then the example you gave too of like, but there is a certain point, or there is some, I guess, some, I don't want to say like danger because it's not a danger, but there is just some element of you could also look dated if you don't do it in a creative, fun way with the times
Yeah.
that we're currently living in.
I think your Eras tour is a good one, where if Taylor Swift had in each of those eras that she does in the concert, wore the clothes that she wore from that when she was recording that album, it would look dated. It wouldn't look interesting. But instead, she recontextualized each album for today, and that's what makes it so captivating, and what makes people want to go, because that album reminds them of their first year of college or whatever, list goes on, but it feels fresh, so it doesn't just feel like someone doing their greatest hits, because we've all
Yes.
been to that concert. You probably saw one on the Jersey Shore of some old time musician reliving
The
the
glory days. Yeah.
years. Yeah, it just that's not interesting, but doing it in this sort of modern way really resonated.
Yes. And too, like changing those outfits and it being like a surprise. And like we could go into a whole thing of like the gamification of that, of like, which one am I going to get type thing.
Yeah,
It's like a
yeah,
mystery box, right? Like, which
totally.
I could have a whole, yeah, I could go on for hours and hours and hours about just like the smart business plays there. But
You,
I
you
will,
do a podcast on that.
I know, I believe me. It's taking restraint. I've already sold myself that I could do that. Um, but no, it's those things that it's like, and when you see them in retail versus e-commerce, and that's why I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion as we move more into, I guess, like higher level thought processes around the retail customer experience. Because as you know, that's what my 9 to 5 work is like the customer experience, right? There's like a specific niche in which the software company Malomo I work for does that, but it's all the same realm of the customer experience. So before we dive into that, can you give a background of Mythology for our listeners? Because it's not just retail design that you all work in. And yeah, give us a little bit of background before we dive into your area of expertise and kind of get into the tactical side of things.
Sure. So Mythology is, we call ourselves a creative company, based in New York City in, like kind of NoHo area. We're, 30 plus people, and we do three different things. We do traditional advertising. So if like one of our big clients is Target, and so we'll do back to school. We'll do all their limited time offer stuff like the Diane van Furstenberg collaboration, all of those kind of designer collabs. We'll do all of the work around that. Additionally, we do branding. So for Target, again, we named, I'm blanking on the quantity, but all the big in-house brands, Cat and Jack, Pillow Fort, Project 62, Spritz, it goes on and on. So we'll not only name it, but we'll do the branding and all of the brand identity and make it feel like a real brand inside. One of the anecdotes Target came back to us with that is people want to know where else they could buy Cat and Jack because they thought it was a brand that moved into Target. So we do that, and then branding things we do like Harry's shave. We named that brand. We did Hims, all that kind of stuff. So we really see ourselves as people who like truly understand brand. And then the last thing is the retail, which is what I do. And so a lot of the past 10 years or so have been about these direct to consumer brands like a Warby Parker, um, living online at first and then saying, well, what if we did retail? And then helping these brands that people only experience online show up at retail, but not just feel like any other eyeglass store or, insert the blank. And so that's really been my focus. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So that's actually, I sometimes it gets hard to like talk about hypotheticals. So I would love to like use the Warby Parker experience of, especially because this podcast is mainly focused in e-commerce, and use that kind of like a case study or just like walking through your thought process as you're building out the retail customer experience. So if a company like Warby Parker or someone who has an online presence is coming to you and is like, we want to build out something that is different, but don't know how to do it. Where do you kind of like, how do you, I'm going to call it an audit. I don't know if that's the right term, but like, how do you kind of look at their whole company and then take their ideas and then pepper, start to break down and like pepper in your thoughts here and there and elsewhere, to arrive at the store that we all know as Warby Parker today? Because I think that would be, I'm always so interested in like the thought process behind the execution of something that like I'm seeing as the consumer, I'm seeing the finished product, right? But like the roadmap of how you actually get there, I think that would be really, really curious to hear from our listeners.
Sure. So, with Warby, they were this disruptor brand. Obviously, there's a company called Luxottica that owns every sunglass brand under the sun. And they really were like, well, why do glasses cost this much? And so they created this disruptive brand that was able to sell glasses for $95. But what we wanted to make sure was that the brand, even though the offering was inexpensive, that it didn't feel cheap. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to be, there's cheater brands now that sort of reference Warby, but say like, and we're even cheaper than that, and they don't have any, for lack of a better term, soul to them.
They don't have a brand presence the way, yeah, Warby Parker might.
Yeah. And so what we helped Warby do even before we did retail for them, and again, that's kind of where the three different departments come in, is that some things come in as a retail project, some things leave as a retail project. They sort of are coming in from all these different angles. But we really helped Warby create their brand voice. And one of the big platforms was this idea of the literary life well lived, right?
Mm.
Because when you're wearing glasses, maybe you're reading, and we all have those, back to that idea of nostalgia, these references of, reading a great book on the beach or seeing in a movie, someone just, with glasses on reading a book, or just the idea of like going to school and studying and it just feeling like glasses are not something that makes you nerdy, but something that makes you cool. And having
Yeah,
some
it's
of
like a symbol of like education and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and just being cultured
Catholicism.
and not being, vapid, for lack of a better term. Like, just it's like glasses are part of this lifestyle. So once we had that kind of platform, then we said, okay, well, where do glasses live? And obviously one of the places that came up for us was libraries. And libraries are great because they're places to learn, but they're also for everyone. They're inclusive, they're beautiful, but that beauty is not just for a rarefied, few, it's for everyone. And so we really took a lot of that visual language. And again, that's back to the idea of like not nostalgia, but referential, is like we didn't just make it look like a library and say it's a library. We use cues of a library to recontextualize it for them. And we did special, elements, like, so again, back to the idea of like not wanting it to feel elevated, even though the thing for sale is inexpensive. We did, beautiful terrazzo floors and all this incredible millwork with books that were different colors, and we put all of the glasses. Usually go to a glasses store, and since they're $400 plus, they're behind glass, and someone has to stand there and look at you while you try them on. We put everything out in the open. Also, Warby Parker and Instagram were born the same year, founded the same
Mhm.
year. So there was this whole new way of people socially shopping that really hadn't been invented yet. Now that's de rigueur, that someone's going to, take pictures of themselves trying on clothes, saying which one's better, or, doing hauls and all of that stuff. But that really hadn't existed yet. And so we put these every 36 inches, put full length mirrors so that you could really try on, in a typical glasses situation, you have a little hand mirror that just shows your face. Now it's part of your outfit. Maybe you're buying 4 pairs because they're so inexpensive, because you want to be able to match different your fashion that you want to express. So it really became this world where you had the kind of foundational aesthetic of a library, but became about sort of self-expression.
I love that. Yeah, so the like all the little details, I feel like that's something that in retail, maybe as a consumer, like I'm not even picking up on that, like just being like, oh, that's like different, but you kind of like skip over that step and you just think it's cool and you're like using it anyways, right? You're not really like, as a consumer, I would say maybe it would be different because now I'm in this space of
Yep.
like brands and having to think more intentionally about the customer experience. But before then, there was just so much that I know I was I guess like I was in the mindset of being a shopper and not really thinking about like, oh, this is a really intentional placement, or like cross sells and upsells that would get me at, like when you're exiting a retail store, usually, especially if they sell a lot of different products in a lot of different areas of your life, there's like the gum or the candy, right? Like a grocery store, they're cross selling different products that you might not think like, oh, I need to go get this or this magazine or this book or whatever it is, right? But then you're standing in line, you're like, I did want to read that, or like I'm gonna need gum later at some point, and then you just throw it in your basket, right?
Mhm.
So I apply that only to say that the experience now of being in this industry is so like it's so fascinating to me, and to see like full length mirrors. Like I remember I don't wear glasses, but my sister does, and there's like an outdoor, it's not fully outdoor, but like you could walk outdoors in New Jersey, and there's a Warby Parker there store there. And I remember my mom taking my sister and I just to like go, and I was just kind of like there because right, like my sister needs glasses. but she was the one who was like actually trying them on. And I remember she was like so just having so much fun, like seeing what kind of style she wanted to bring out. And I think there's with glasses, especially as we were talking about, like the symbolicism of them of like either nerds or like intelligence or reading or libraries or like there's just so many different characters that have like worn glasses through the years that we've seen in media. And so it's something that I think to what's the word I'm looking for, to like revolutionize or like to innovate on the space and do so in a way that's like subtly like, okay, the mirrors, we don't need it just to be this little handheld mirror. You can like go and have the full customer experience, or with the example of not having the glasses behind actual like tempered glass for security reasons. My question to you is like, is there anything that, you know, your brand has, or like your company has pitched or like seen where it's like maybe I guess some fear on the brand side? Because my train of thought is like with innovation there obviously comes risk, and so like it's an easy parallel to draw, okay, the security risk, right, that someone's going to run away with these glasses even though they're affordable. Is there anything that you all have seen like, okay, this is maybe like quote unquote a riskier thing that we might be suggesting or might be employing, but has paid off in like dividends once you actually see the customer response? Because I think like in retail, I parallel this to a lot of brands might see something and be like, oh, I don't need that, or like that's not important to my consumers, just because they've never done it before, or they've never seen other e-commerce brands who are like implementing this part of the customer experience, or like they think that like subscription is a great example of this, of if you give customers the ability to adjust their subscription program, a lot of brands are rightfully so think like, oh, they're just going to cancel because they have so much flexibility. But it's actually the inverse of that, where it's like brand or customers are like, oh my god, I love that I can customize this to my life. And now there's like that movement. So it's a long-winded way of saying, is there anything you've ever seen that has been like, okay, we're like really excited for this, it's risky, but we're gonna like hope that it pays off, and then it does in the end? Or has there been like things where it's maybe it didn't pay off and then we have to adjust?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the first one that comes to mind is a store we did for Sonos,
Mm,
what wireless home audio system in Soho, and they had never had any of their own retail. They had only been in places like Best Buy and Target and things like that. And um, obviously, speakers sound works by bouncing off the environment it's in. So testing a speaker's quality in the middle of a Best Buy where there's tons of other noise and the next wall is, hundreds of feet away. It's just a subpar experience. So, but they wanted a store that, was high volume sales and all of that. So we suggested, they really wanted to connect Sonos to the idea of home. And we suggested actually building these sound attenuated pods that were in the shape of a house. And each one sort of had a different look and feel, but they basically all were these mini demo stations where you really could understand how amazing Sonos was. And when you were in there, like your heart started racing because when the sounds came on, it was like being at like a symphony. But to get there, we built the whole store in a warehouse to really test. We had users come in and test all the different experiences, and we really, really tweaked all of that. There was also a UX component with an iPad that connected, or a tablet that connected you to be able to operate the system. And it was incredibly, incredibly complex. And they really had to kind of believe in the idea because it was a big undertaking. But when we opened finally in Soho, it was really revolutionized retail, and it got won a lot of awards for that because it was seen as like a real shift, and it really answered the client's brief, which was how can we get people to really experience this audio, and if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. Because common sense would be like, okay, we'll have some displays and maybe there's walls, but like you kind of can hear one from the other. And you know but instead we really like, no, like we want people to imagine what this their homes would be like with these audio equipment. So yeah, I think that was a leap of faith, but one that paid off.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example. And I love that you brought up like obviously in retail, right? You want to have an experience that is going to convert and you want, right? Like there's the business element of it takes a lot of time and money and resources to build out an actual retail experience, especially if it's the first one that a brand is building out, right? Like it can be, there's a little bit of adrenaline and a little bit of fear that's mixed and a little bit of excitement that's mixed in all of that. And so I love that you brought in like, you want it to be an experience that serves the product well, but you also want it to be something that someone can like really truly see the product and hopefully, purchase Sonos for their home. So obviously this podcast is called Retention Chronicles. It's something we focus on a lot. And retail, I think, serves both acquisition and retention quite well, just because you are obviously acquiring new customers who are just walking into your store, maybe coming because they heard about the Sonos experience and they were like, that's so cool. I just want to go see it. Like there's a curiosity element there. But you're also getting customers who, maybe want to purchase, they have a second home and they want to purchase again. Like you get returning customers as well. So I wanted to ask you, is there an element of thinking through like, okay, this is something that'll serve like new customers well, this is something that'll serve returning customers well? Is there an overlap between like, okay, this will serve any customer well? And how are you talking about acquisition and retention to those brands even before you're building out the store, and seeing if you convert and whatnot?
Yeah. In retail design, we have something called customer journey. I mean, it's not germane just to us, but that's a lot what we talk about. And when we design in those early stages, a lot of times we'll show on the same floor plan the customer journey for a new customer versus a returning customer. And usually the new customer engages with all of the education and storytelling that we build in. They're falling in love with the brand for the first time, and they're learning about the materials we use and the the values of the brand. And we really try to sort of romance all of that. But a returning customer who's already loves the brand, they want efficiency or they want to feel special in their own way. And so it's really about sort of designing those elements in. I would say for American Girl, the great thing is it's a store with food and beverage. So, you can go there not only for a special day with your mom and grandma and sister, but you could also have your birthday there. And then you can have, and that becomes sort of a rite of passage moment. So, and then lastly, like they have the care center or the doll salon. So even if you only own one doll or two dolls, there's lots of reasons to come back with those dolls to have experiences, even if you're not just going there to buy yet another doll. I think with Sonos, you it's a little bit of a gateway drug, for lack of a better term. When you buy one Sonos, you realize, oh my God, it would be great if I had two because then they could connect. And then I realize, oh, I need a new home theater system. So it is a little bit of a building block thing. Plus, it has its own operating system. So you really get kind of hooked on just the familiarity with the UX. I mean, right now they're going through a tough time because their UX has had a big issue and they're trying to repair it because customers aren't happy. But I think for a while it was, it just was this reliable thing that um allowed. I mean, I use it. I still to this day am a addicted Sonos person because it's just so nice to be able to play the same music throughout your whole house and not have a super fancy wired system in the ceiling and all of that stuff. You can move with it. There's a lot of advantages. So, um, I think we really feel like retail, you guys are e-commerce experts, and I think people's attention span online is incredibly short. And so a lot of that storytelling about why this product is different, especially when you're doing a disruptive brand that is the new toothbrush or the new sneaker or the new luggage or the new, fill in the blank, you want to be able to tell your customers why yours is different and why you need to get rid of your old one because this one's so much better. It's better for you, it's better for the environment, it gives one back to people in need, all of that sort of stuff. And retail is just a really nice place to do that. It's sort of a temple to your brand, and you don't have the noise of them clicking out of it or being distracted or leaving something in the cart. When we From a customer retention standpoint, the Sonos store, we found, because the product is quite heavy, the subwoofer is like 50 pounds. So you might
Mhm.
not want to walk out of the store with it because it's just now you're in Soho carrying around something 50 pounds. We found that store was a tide that lifted all of the online sales. So as soon as that store opened, you saw huge bubble of sales around that zip code. And so, I think that's another way that we're sort of looking at retail for brands right now that are like, hey, we want that awareness, but we don't know how, like what the KPIs should be. It's retail can be marketing. It can be this interactive billboard that you don't need to have some high pressured sales desire from, but instead becomes this place to bring awareness to your brand and also be able to sort of have a backdrop to tell your story in a clear, coherent way.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love the I won't call it juxtaposition because obviously sales and marketing are so related, but I love reframing a retail experience to be something that is marketing focused. And then like the example of people don't want to carry around 50 pounds of a
Yeah.
subwoofer, so going online and buying it, especially in New York. And so I think that's a great place to round out this conversation. There's so many other questions I want to ask you just about like other collaborations that you've done and partnerships. But maybe we'll have you back on just to go into that because there are many and there's a lot of awesome things. And I think retail is something that e-commerce sometimes seems a little more distant just because it's like you are shopping, and so the brands who can personalize that and personalize well, they last, right? But retail is something that has been around for much longer, and so I think it's a way more relatable, way more personable experience, just from the get-go of just the nature of like you get to interact with a brand in their store and their temple, which I like that you said, their
Yeah.
temple for their brand. So thank you so much, Ted. This has been an absolutely phenomenal and such an intriguing discussion. I can't wait to get it live. So thank you for taking the time early in your day to make it happen.
Happy to get me nice and fresh. Thank you so much, Mariah. This was a real treat.